Hello, welcome back to episode 3 of Pause, Rewind, Play. I'm very excited today because we're going to be talking through the future of TV and consumer monetization. In order to do that, I've got a wonderful guest with me, Jason. How you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, very well, thank you.
Superb. And why don't we start, in fact, before we jump into the topic at hand, just give us a quick bit about your background and what you've been doing.
Sure. So I've been involved in telecoms and media for the majority or pretty much all of my career, spanning 25 to 30 years. Going all the way back into doing working on radio, presenting on radio in my teens, and then through startups and the growth of the internet, and now through to where we are today with the abundance of streaming and all the other services available.
Fabulous. Okay, and today we're going to talk about consumer monetization. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of it, but we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the story so far, and also a little bit about where we are today. So I think we can let's reflect first of all on kind of how we got to where we got to. We had traditional revenue models, so the likes of ad-supported channels, cable and satellite subscriptions, pay-per-views. These are all models that we know and recognise very well and love, or maybe don't love so much. Who knows? But all of those in combination, we've had for some time, and those are not just been a function of the digital age, but also pre-digital. They've existed, to give a sense of timescale. They've existed for quite some time already. Is there anything within that you'd want to comment on how you saw that evolve? Maybe any macro steps that occurred during that time?
Yeah, I think some highlights amongst that timeline there's key enablers. So I think when we went through the transition from dial-up connectivity into always-on broadband connectivity, that was really a key driver for service enabling, right? So, and a lot of the things that I was involved in at the time were looking at how do you take content and how do you make it work within that domain, within that environment.
Absolutely.
The same applied to voice, I think, as well, to an extent. And then obviously there was the emergence of more capable personal devices, not just moving away from desktop to laptop computing, which is now probably the most common way to compute, but the smartphone, of course. So with the prevalence of the range of smart devices and then the application stores, that really gave the commercial environment for new experiences to evolve. And then the most recent kind of transition as well is the tools that are in the hands of everybody, really, to be in the position to be not just a consumer but also a creator as well. So it's both of those things together.
We're going to dive on to that, but I think it's fair to say the other model that I haven't mentioned yet that absolutely is prevalent today is that of those SVOD services, SVODs as they're often called. That has been you wouldn't read a news story in the last 5 years relating to the industry that didn't have some mention of that somewhere within it. So we should add that to the
very much
group as well.
And I think also adding to that, I think that when we were looking at what was then labelled as IPTV, the key problem that was being solved at that point was management of time. So the ability to consume, or the ability to be entertained, but to do so in a non-linear way. So it was really that transition from a linear only model, or a linear plus VHS or DVD kind of model, to a model that is that combination of technology. So broadband was really the transport that enabled that experience, and then SVOD was really the application of that as well on top of it. So
that's a really good way
combining those things together.
Yeah, I had a little moment there with the HS, but that's for those of us that know,
exactly. Yeah,
but that was a really great point as well about problem solved, and that actually is a brilliant segue into I think some of the benefits and disadvantages that come along with these models, and there are a huge range of benefits that have been provided, problem solved, needs met, and I think it's also fair to say, on balance, that those models are commented on, fed back by consumers, that there are aspects of that previously they found challenging. So, for example, one aspect of that is long contract length, and I think the response to that has been to provide much more flexibility in that regard. So there's been all of these elements that are cropped up, these characteristics within those models, and further waves of whether you call it kind of iteration or even innovation to look at different ways of kind of rounding the edges on some of those. What do you think the impacts of that growth and all of that kind of sequential evolution has been on consumers and businesses? Do you have a particular kind of view through that? I know you're very good with a summary, so I'm keen to get a thought.
I mean, it's been interesting. I mean, there's been some, again, if you look at this sort of the way the industry has responded to technology's development, I mean, and there have been some key things along the timeline again. So if you look at look back in through the timeline, you look at things like 3D TV, you look at the transition from SD to HD to 4K, and then organizations looking beyond that to sort of say, well, do we need to keep going further? And actually consumers then sort of almost pushing back and saying, actually, that's not solving a problem anymore. And I think the same applies to things like
definitely true of some technologies.
Definitely true of some technologies, absolutely. So I think that when the technology leads the conversation, it can often end up in false starts or just misinterpretations of the needs of the market, the needs of the consumer. And if you look at what problems need to be solved, or what consumers say, here are things that I would like to be solved: simplicity, ease of use, ease of setup, those things typically bubble to the surface. Personalization was another industry trend that bubbled up and then kind of flattened off, and then it's kind of now taken a double step again. And I think what's driven personalization and the need for personalization is just that there's so much content available, and navigating through that content in a meaningful way that correlates to your availability in time is challenging without supporting that process with additional tools or additional applications or additional capabilities.
And to fold that back to monetization, I think, where we've seen the optionality provided, we're going to come on to some of these, what I guess maybe they're not even emerging, maybe these are just current models as well. We'll come to those in a sec, but those are in some cases a response to that consideration from customers that maybe they feel like they want. Take flexibility as an example, other optionality there, other choices to be able to make, hence that flex. And I don't know if it's quite personalization, maybe it's customization, but basically some way to have different options within the ways that monetization occurs. And so that's actually an amazing segue into what these emerging or current models are now, on top of the ones we've already talked about. So we've seen, for example, this talks directly to that optionality point around SVOD and the move to a kind of freemium AVOD hybrid option. So, and it's been embraced. I think there's pure play examples of that.
Yeah.
There's embracement of that by some of the SVOD providers in that they now have an option that is combining or pulling you into that SVOD funnel, but maybe you don't go all the way down it. So maybe there's some ads slotted in there. I'm quite keen to get a thought, a soundbite, a mind spark from.
I think fast and AVOD is partly a reactive process. I think it's partly the industry reacting to, again, sentiment in the consumer space. The consumers are basically saying we've reached a point of saturation almost with the availability of services, the availability of content. So again, that problem of solving accessibility to libraries, that instant access problem, has already been solved, and they're almost trying to solve the same problem again by adapting to the needs of the market. And I think what FAST and what AVOD do is that they basically are saying, we're going to carry on doing the same thing in the same ways, but we're going to position it slightly differently so that it appears more accessible to consumers. It appears more in line with the needs of consumers. But fundamentally, I don't think it's still not solving. It's still solving an old problem, but using a different methodology, using a different approach.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you want to get to the point where the flexibility that provides is that the consumer is in the driving seat, and I don't think they currently are in the driving seat. I think they're basically just dumb receptors almost of that experience.
Not a receptor. Well, maybe I am.
A passive receptor of the
Passive receptor.
You're a passive receptor,
Yeah.
right? So you're basically given a sort of a curated experience. I think there's some interesting concepts to sort of will evolve from that, in the sense that I think you will likely get to the point where the channel concept, the linear channel concept, the timeline concept of how a channel is put together, that the consumer will actually have a responsibility to define what that channel looks like. So you might say, create a horror channel for me, create an experience for me that's defined by films of a certain genre or content of a certain type. And then it's a very dynamic process. So at the moment, it feels like it's quite a static process, but I think over time, it will evolve to become a more dynamic and interactive process.
Okay. Well, I know we're going to come to a bit on futures just in a second. One of the dimension of these emerging models is, around the kind of monetization side is, and I just wanted to touch on it briefly, is where we see SVODs combining or bundling their service with another aspect that's outside of entertainment, whether that's delivery, whether it's devices. There's a whole, it seems, broadening plethora of services that are mixing together, your entertainment on demand,
right,
and just video on demand. Let's just call it entertainment on demand with other elements. And another one is gaming, of course.
Massive,
too. But I think that that's an interesting. So we've got the on ramp to those models and some innovation that's occurred there, and some additional optionality as a result that's given to customers of likes of AVOD and freemium. Then we've got this kind of broadening lateral spread of for the subscription that you have, putting other things together, whether entertainment, to expand the value that the customer has. Is there anything else, I think, before we move on to futures that sits in your mind with regards to just the kind of current levels of change that we're seeing?
I think what's likely to adapt, the adaptation of the market there, I think, is likely to go in the direction of, today you have a relationship between content, the creators of the content, and peripheral value around that, and then that might then cascade into things like advertising and fast, and you can suddenly see that the business model and the ecosystem then have sort of defined interaction points and defined boundary points. But then ultimately beyond that, the relationship between the content creator and the consumer can be extended, and the platforms themselves can be the facilitator of that ultimately. That it goes beyond content being the pure source of value from the consumer's point of view.
Hello, I hope you're enjoying the conversation in today's episode. I just wanted to take a moment to say a huge thank you to Spicy Mango, who are our Series 1 sponsor. If you're looking to build global scale media and digital publishing platforms, Spicy Mango bring that serious expertise. They dig deep, they look at your business goals, and they ensure technology actually does what it should do in order to drive growth and remain cost effective. You can get in touch with them at spicymango.co.uk. And with that, let's get back to the episode. I mean, I tell you, one thing I worry about is overwhelm for customers. I think we absolutely want to find a way to have consumers, users, customers engaged, but a little bit what we talked about before, the plethora of options available, the optionality in some ways can be a bit overwhelming. There are so many different combinations that are available. So it's not just, to your point, about the challenges and the solutions to content discovery, because like you say, there's a lot of tooling in place now, a lot of solutions, a lot of offerings that have a pretty good go at doing that. It's actually before that, when you're at your point of choosing your service either for the evening or maybe even which service you're going to subscribe to, and just all of the different combinations. I worry a little bit that the amount of variety out there can lead to a bit of overwhelm and ultimately a bit of fatigue. Right? We always, there's a well trodden path that many of us in the industry talk about, of not being able to efficiently find something to watch. I'm talking about the stuff before this, where you're saying, which service have I got that with?
Yeah.
Which one do I go to? And should I be subscribed to this one or that one? We're in a really good place with kind of variety, but as a result of that, there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, and I think that the main players in terms of platform providers and content providers are almost at the point now where they're having to silo themselves off again. And I think the reason that they almost feel the need to silo themselves off is because if you're distributing your experience, your application through an intermediary, like a device manufacturer, then they in turn become the gatekeeper of that transactional relationship.
Yeah.
And that's something that is challenging for a lot of the content providers. I don't think it bothers individual content creators because I think that they're more agile. They're not an organization. They're not a multi-territory organization. They're an individual entity, and they are a brand in their own right in many respects. So I think it's just that interaction between the sort of more traditional mainstream content providers and the plethora of individual content creators and their ability to be agile in that space and be flexible in that space.
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting period ahead of us over the next couple of years where there'll almost be a necessity to coexist, but in a very fundamentally different way to the way that these entities exist today. I mean,
well, that is where we're headed next. We're headed to the future of consumer monetization, and what is it going to look like going forward? I think when I was kind of writing my notes for this episode, and I was thinking about could we see a confluence or convergence of I'm going to say it, like shoppable TV, like we
right, yeah.
You and I have both been there, times before.
Probably built a few myself in the past, so I'm sure.
Maybe that's true, right? Data-driven personalization of advertising. So again, a different way to deliver monetization. There's lots of different models that can exist here. You can do a lot with microtransactions as well, which has been very popular in the mobile domain. You could imagine a scenario where something similar like that crops up in what we call TV today. So, what's your sense of what could be dominant or prevalent emerging trends in monetization? Pick one or two, perhaps.
I think we're at the point now where we're at the beginning of the process of the blurring of the lines between a consumer and a creator. And I think now it's becoming so prevalent in society that you will quickly reach a point where you no longer need to make that distinction anymore.
Right.
At that point, there's a necessity for a circular economy approach in the sense that the consumption process needs to be reciprocated and rewarded from the point of view of creation, and creation and consumption will coexist. But then you have the beginning of the process of the currency of consumption, right? That today you basically prepay to have access to more stuff than you have the time to go through. When actually what you really need is you need that granularity and that fine nuanced relationship between the things that are interesting to you and the things that you want to gravitate towards, but being rewarded in the process of doing so.
I love that. The currency of consumption.
The currency of consumption, yeah. So I think that's the kind of direction overall that we need to be heading in, and I think that the creator economy will pull the industry, the more traditional industries and the platforms, in that direction. I think that they will lead, and that the traditional platforms will be, out of necessity to survive, have to go in that direction as well.
I mean, I back to that point that we were talking about a moment ago, that I think about and sometimes fret a little bit about the kind of subscriber or customer fatigue, all of this. I think we will see new and interesting forms, new and interesting models that will be offered, and I think about whether they will occur in such a fashion as to help solve for some of that kind of friction or upfront fatigue or not. But I think to your point about this going from linear to circular, that if there is a degree of interactivity there, as you mentioned, that kind of reward aspect, and that,
right,
that begets a need for then having a very interactive engagement. rather than you kind of selecting what's coming down the pipe at you.
Right.
You're actually interacting in a really true and dynamic fashion. I think maybe that could help address some of that potential fatigue. Would you?
I think it will, because I think that consumers will feel that they play a part in the process. That the content isn't the only reward. The reward, it goes far beyond the content itself, and I think that's becoming more and more obvious. I think the enabler for things like that is things like private cloud compute, where you start to create a very defined private relationship between the things that you seek, the things that you consume, and the value of doing those things, not just to the creator or the provider, but to you, the consumer, as well.
Yeah.
And we're beginning to see the enablers for that coming into the technology that we use, not just to create, but also to consume. And we're seeing that we're sort of Gen 1 of that capability today.
Early stages, yeah, for sure.
But by the time you get to probably, let's say 3 to 5 years out, absolutely, you will have an end-to-end ecosystem that will support that capability from a technology point of view.
Yep.
And the service model will be there to take full advantage of that as well.
So those future models will enable consumers to kind of not just choose how they want to pay, but like you say, have this kind of this feedback loop of reward as well, and ultimately giving them more control in the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. TV experience, and that's quite an exciting thought to have, in that the tailoring, the refinement, the definition, the personalization, the customization of your experience downstream to you is improved, but also that loop is created as well.
Yes.
Back.
Absolutely. Now,
I think that's a really, really exciting area to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, so look, we've covered a lot in a very short period of time.
Normally it takes a lot longer.
We've talked about evolution, the story so far, if you like. We talked a little bit about current and emerging. We talked about future. There's a lot there. Do you have a final thought, as it were, for today, or a recommendation, or some sort of further insight about the topic of where we're going with consumer monetization that you'd like to share?
I think we're now at the point now where all of the key enablers are now beginning to come together. I think that there's a convergence of a new, a more refined ecosystem that's really built around the needs of consumers. It's not just about connectivity. It's not just about speed. There's optimizations now that are now being applied into that process.
And they're fundamentals, right?
They're the fundamentals. They're the building blocks, the glue that goes between those things that enable those new scalable experiences. But I think the key is that consumers will increasingly be in the driving seat, and it's the beginning of the process of that circular economy and that currency of consumption.
I love that. Currency consumption that is a soundbite for the day. So look, Jason, thanks so much for giving me your thoughts. I know you're going to join me on another topic in another episode as well. So I'm looking forward to that. Thanks to you, the viewers, for joining us and watching through to the end of the episode. If you like what you see, please subscribe or drop a like. That would be chantastic. And in times when you're talking about TV technology, sometimes it is good to pause, rewind, and play.